Good afternoon, everybody. It is 12 o'clock noon Central Time. We are going to go ahead and get started. I don't want to occupy too much of your day today, so we'll get moving on this. Before I begin, I want to introduce myself. My name is Jordan Walker. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Seaver Story Walker. We'll talk a little bit more about what we do as a law firm and who we are during the presentation, but just as on the outset, I want to inform everybody, who I am, what we're doing today. In that vein, I want to state that we do not work for Ameren. We do not work for the power line company. We don't work for the utility. We work against the utility. We work for landowners that are in your situation, such that you are a landowner whose land is potentially going to be acquired by Ameren for this power line, for this project. We do not work for Ameren. We work for the landowner against Ameren. And the reason why I say that is that not everyone is always aware of who we are when we send our letters and who we're working for. But I want to get that clarified just off the jump. So with that being said, we are going to go ahead and get started. Get started with the presentation. Sorry, one sec. Okay. I want to share my screen here, and then we'll get this moving. Okay, so again, my name is Jordan Walker. I'm an income partner at Seaver Story Walker Law Firm. Today we're going to be talking about the Ameren Central Illinois Grid Transformation Project. A lot of words for a big project. So let's get started. Again, for those that missed the first introduction, we are eminent domain attorneys. We represent landowners only. We do not work for Ameren. We are adversarial to Ameren. We work on the other side. Today, what we're going to be doing is talking about the project to the extent we have some knowledge about it. We're going to talk about eminent domain, of course, and we are most importantly going to share our knowledge. We do this a lot. We do this across the country. I personally have handled multiple landowner groups going up against Ameren and other utility companies in Illinois. We do, like I said, we do it all over the country, and we've done plenty of work in central and downstate Illinois fighting utility companies. And as a consequence, we've learned quite a bit about how these companies work, how this process works, what to expect, what to look for. And our goal today is to relay that knowledge so that you are equipped when and if Ameren comes in and makes an offer to you for your property. And yeah, that being said, real quick, a little bit more about our firm. This is the only type of law we do. Our headquarters is in Indiana, but we have offices obviously in Illinois. We have an office in Ohio, Kentucky, North Carolina, Texas, Georgia, multiple other states, all doing eminent domain. And I actually am the only attorney in our firm licensed to practice law in Illinois. So if you were to work with our firm, you'd be working with me. Our mission as a law firm in general is to fill a void that we recognize exists, and that void is competent counsel that can help out landowners faced with eminent domain. There are not a lot of attorneys that do what we do. And usually if an attorney does what we do, they usually do other things too, another area of law, and they just kind of dabble in eminent domain. That's not how we work. If you go to our website, landownerattorneys.com, you'll see that all of our content is eminent domain based. So let's talk about the project. What's going on? Well, Ameren, a utility company, is looking to basically upgrade or install about 400 miles of transmission line across the state of Illinois. You can see it on the map right there. Most of the segment is part of this northern line, but there is obviously a portion of the southern line as well. There's on the west side of the state that's being affected. Basically, a way to look at this is modernizing of the Ameren utilities and their facilities, modernizing and including capacity. A lot of these lines as they exist, the ones that are being upgraded or added to, are, and we'll get into a little bit, they are of a lower voltage meaning they can only carry so much voltage with them. They want to upgrade that and basically add capacity so that these lines can carry more electricity to wherever they're going. So they're doing a lot of different work. A lot of different new facilities are being installed across the state. 3 new substations and a lot of upgrades to existing substations, and all sorts of facilities are part of this project. It is not just a power line. There's a lot of different facilities being installed. These 2 websites at the bottom could help you. They might be of interest to you moving forward. The first website, amerengridil.com, that is Ameren's website. They actually have an interactive map on the website that you can play around with and see if you can find your property. And if you can, you should be able to see where and what they're doing on your specific property. That's one of the biggest questions we get from folks is, where's it going? What's happening? And luckily on this project, Ameren is deciding to supply an interactive map that landowners can use to find their property. So I'd recommend doing that. The second website is the Illinois Commerce Commission website, and that below it is the docket number. And the reason why I mentioned that is that before this project can be built, just like any other power energy project in Illinois, the Ameren needs to get permission from the Illinois Commerce Commission. This is with any project in Illinois, they need to get approval before they build it. And this project is no different. And if you go to this website, the Illinois Commerce Commission website, you go to the docket, you input that docket number, you'll see exactly what's going on with this project specific to Ameren's filings. They filed their petition for approval back in February. We'll get to timeline here in a bit. But all that filing in February, it's their petition for certificate of public convenience and necessity. That includes pretty much a full description of what they want to build and where they want to build it and when they want to build it. So if you're looking for more information about this project specifically, that's a good place to start. You're going to find quite a bit of information. And also, I should state, if you do have questions, please don't hesitate to use the chat or the Q&A tool on the webinar. I might not address it until the end, just because of the presentation, but feel free to document it. We'll go through it at the end and answer any questions you might have. So here's a timeline of the project. This is also from Ameren's website. As you can see, the red arrow there at the bottom. We are in early 2024. You see the final routes with the Illinois Commerce Commission. Real estate begins. Real estate means buying the easements. So between now and probably the construction starting in 2026, if not maybe a little before that, or if it gets delayed, it might be after that. Probably for the next 2 years, Ameren's going to be acquiring land. And once they get all the land, they will be, of course, beginning construction, assuming they get approval from the ICC. And with that, I do want to note that they do need approval. They do not have it yet. We are operating under the assumption that they will get approval. There's nothing that I have seen in the filing. Ameren is a established utility in Illinois. This isn't like a one-off company trying to do something that nobody's familiar with. And this is all to say that I would anticipate that Ameren would get approval from the ICC. However, if you are one of the folks that wants to stop this project in its entirety, wants to halt it, doesn't want it to be built at all, the time to lodge your complaints is now. That Illinois Commerce Commission website, the docket website, if you are not a fan of this project, if you do not want it to be built, I would recommend you exercising your voice if you'd like, going onto that Illinois Commerce Commission website and registering complaints, lodging complaints. It's a public website. You're allowed to do that. And I don't want anyone to construe our presentation today as accepting of this thing that is definitely going to happen or deterring people from fighting it. We know a lot of people do. Some people like to fight the projects. You're well within your rights. But we're going to focus on as if the project will be happening so that you can prepare accordingly. So what are they building? What does Ameren want to build? I touched on it a little bit earlier. It depends on what part of the route you're on and what they need on your land. So because this isn't just a full brand new line, and there's going to be replacements and different types of acquisitions. Your parcel might have a different acquisition than your neighbor's parcel. There are 4 types of acquisitions that were identified by Ameren in their petition with the ICC. They are going to be acquisitions to rebuild existing lines, add to existing lines. There is going to be some completely new corridor, new power line, meaning there's no existing easement or no existing line on the property. And then there'll also be replacement, of course, where they'll be replacing existing lines. So your parcel could fall under one of these 4 types of acquisitions. You might be able to guess what type of acquisition yours is going to be just based on do you have a power line on your property presently? If you look at the map, are they going next to it or are they going on it? That will kind of inform you about what your acquisition is. Ultimately, though, you will know when Ameren comes in and makes their offer. Or I should say you should know, because they should tell you that and what they're doing on the property. And it should be a duty to figure that out if they don't tell you. So regardless of where we are now, you will eventually know what they're going to want on the property. The goal of it is to get all of the lines, all of the transmission capacity up to 345 kV kilovolts. That's what I mentioned earlier. A lot of the existing lines are 138 kV, much smaller capacity, and they largely have 100-foot corridors. 345 kV requires 150 feet corridors to meet requirements from the NESC, that's National Electric Source Code. They have to meet these requirements, and that requires 150 feet, which means you're going to have a bigger easement. If you already have one, you're going to have a bigger easement on top of it or next to it. And these are, you might ask why they need that much space, and that's because according to code they have to be that far away, usually from trees, shrubage, any sort of tree or whatever that could fall on the line. That's the reason for that. They like to get space and a buffer between the lines and any encumbrances or anything that's on the land. They're going to be building steel monopoles. So it's going to be, if you've seen power lines when you're driving out the road, there's different types. Of course, these are going to be monopole, one pole, single pole. You'll have lattices at the top, of course, but these are going to be a single pole transmission lines, which that they have a lower footprint, or a smaller footprint, I should say, on the land as opposed to a 4-cornered transmission line. So that is one potentially positive thing about this entire project. The monopoles are going to be about 100, 125 feet tall, 80 to 140 according to Ameren's petition. There'll be about 7 to 8 structures a mile, and about 700 to 900 feet between the structures, between the monopoles, I should say. So that gives you an idea of, when you're looking at your acquisition, how big it is, how much it stretches across your property. You'll be able to, at least preliminarily determine or estimate how many poles you're actually going to have on your property. So that's what they're building. What do they want from you in order to build what they want to build? Well, for most folks on this line, what Ameren is going to come to seek from you is an easement. And an easement, as I put in the presentation, it's essentially a deed, but you're not selling the entirety of the property. You're only selling the right to do what the easement says, where the easement says, and when the easement permits it. And that sounds very vague. But the reality is that an easement is a grant of rights. And if it is not specifically granted in that easement through the language of the easement, then it's not permitted. Meaning, whatever the easement says is going to govern what Ameren's allowed to do, what you're allowed to do, what anyone's allowed to do in that area. They're going to set forth the duties of Ameren, the duties of you, if you have any, liabilities to Ameren, so on and so forth. And one of the, I'd say the top question I get from folks is, when discussing these cases, what is Ameren going to be allowed to do? Will they be allowed to knock down my fences? Will they be allowed to keep my gates open and let my livestock out? Will they knock down my crops? Will they be liable if they knock down my crops? What happens if the power line falls down and falls outside the easement? Whose responsibility is that? And the question to this answer every single time is, It all depends on what the easement says. If the easement permits Ameren to be wherever they'd like on the property, they can be wherever they like on the property. If the easement permits them to only build one pole on the easement area, they can only build one pole on the easement area. It all depends on what that document says. It is, of course, the most important document of your case, and it absolutely needs to be crafted properly. We'll talk about what that means here in a bit, but it is the most important document of your case. It is imperative that at the very least you have somebody review that document to ensure that what Ameren tells you they're going to do actually matches up with what the easement permits them to do. So with that being said, we'll talk a little bit more about that importance, because I just ended that with saying, making sure the easement matches what they tell you. And that's because whatever they tell you verbally, put it in an email, you name it, that doesn't mean anything as far as Ameren's rights to use the property. Verbal promises made outside the easement, any of these types of assurances that Ameren will undoubtedly try to give you when they're trying to acquire your land, say, oh, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do this. We're only going to do this. We're not going to do that. That's fine if they can say it, but your response every time should be, okay, well, it needs to be in the easement. And not only does it need to be an easement, you're probably going to need to take things out of the easement. We have gone against Ameren quite a bit. I have seen hundreds of Ameren easements. It is all too common for the first version of the easement that Ameren presents to you to be deficient in many ways. This is on purpose, I would presume, that they come to landowners with really just broad, unenforceable easements that give Ameren way too much ability, way too much permission, way too much authority on your land without protecting you either. It's fairly common for Ameren to do this. I've seen it before, and I presume I'm going to see it on this project, that they are going to present documents that aren't very good. And these are some examples of how those documents can be deficient and how they can be in favor for Ameren. So one of these pitfalls that I've seen before with Ameren is they like to get an unfettered access. They like to get access to the entire parcel, not just the easement area. This is fairly common. They will say, they'll come to you and they'll say, don't worry, we'll just use the public roads and we'll just use the easement itself to access the easement for construction or maintenance or what have you. They'll tell you that, but the easement itself, a lot of times they'll say, no, actually they can access this property and this easement wherever they want. They can go through the middle of your land that's not even seemingly part of the easement just to get to the power line. Because the easement permits them to do that. That's one thing that they will put in their easement to allow them to do. And you'll see, well, wait a minute, this is not what I agreed to. This is only an easement to this certain area of the land, and they're driving through the middle of my property to get to it. And they'll point to the easement and say, hey, your easement says we can do it, and we're going to do it because we're interested in building this line, not your specific property. So they'll try to potentially do that. I've seen clauses that don't specify what happens to crop losses in the future, future damages down the road, knocking over fences, letting livestock out, messing up field tile, irrigation, you name it, knocking down crops 10 years from now for maintenance purposes. If there's no clause in there that makes them liable specifically and in what event they're liable, then again, they are going to take advantage of the landowner. They're going to try to leave all this stuff out so that they can save money in the future, just like they want to save money now. I've seen no clauses for proper ground restoration. This is a very big deal when you're constructing on rural and agricultural properties. I understand this isn't all agricultural property, but it is quite a bit. They need to restore the property. They need to make sure it's leveled. They need to make sure the soils aren't mixed. The subsoil doesn't mix with the topsoil. That it's excuse me, that it's not ponding, that there aren't depressions in the land from the construction, that the trucks that they ran their or rather the trucks that ran onto the easement didn't compact the land too much, or they can fix that compaction, or they have to fix that compaction. These are types of things that need to be considered because it's not just about the construction, it's about the restoration, it's about down the road. These are all clauses that need to be in the easement. You need to have proper ground restoration language or they will not adhere to it. You need to force them to do these things. And the way to force them to do it is to bind them through a contract in the easement. Liability for power line problems. I've seen them try to shift liability onto the landowner in the event, an emergency happens. Let's say the monopole falls down and kills somebody. That's obviously a terrible example and hopefully it never happens. But, if there's a liability language, or if there isn't liability language in the easement that covers what happens in these types of events, who's liable, who's not, that could fall on you down the road. And maybe not just you, but whoever inherits the property or whoever you sell the property to. And then the final thing that I've seen, and we'll talk about an example of this is in the next slide, and that is in easements, we've seen scenarios where Ameren of utilities will acquire an easement, and the easement will permit them not only to build a power line, but it'll allow them to build multiple power lines, or it'll allow them to sell their rights in the easement area to pipelines or to other utility companies to allow them to come in and use Ameren's easement to build a pipeline or fiber optic cable, which Ameren, of course, will make money off of via the lease payments. And whoever the company is that's using it's going to make money off it. The only person in that scenario who's not making any money off the construction is the landowner because they already sold the easement to Ameren. And this is fairly common because Ameren sees an opportunity if they acquire your property and it gives them the right to build a power line, but also build other stuff. That right is valuable, and they know that, and they can sell it to other energy companies or use it themselves to make money. So something to keep in mind. And again, I want to give an example of that happening actually just as we spoke. And the reason why these situations arise is because easements are contracts. They are effectively contracts with the land and not necessarily with the person. So even though the landowner owns it and they agree to sell the easement to Ameren, Ameren's contract isn't necessarily with that landowner through the easement. Ameren's contract is with the land because the easement sticks with the land. So when you go to sell this property, if you go to sell this property in 5 years, 10 years, easement will still be there. The new buyer of the property will take the property subject to the easement. And so ancient easements that were at one time ancient, become modern easements. And what you sign, what you agree to will become your heir's burden, depending on what it says. A prime example of that is, I use this example quite a bit because it's instructive, is the Southern Access Pipeline, which is a pipeline that was built in central Illinois. I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago, around that time period. We represented some landowners on that. And when we first started marketing to this project, we got some people that contacted us and they said, well, and this was an Enbridge line, this is an Enbridge pipeline, if you're familiar with the company. They said, Enbridge came out and they said, well, we're going to build a pipeline on your property and, we're going to start construction next month. And the landowners will be like, well, no, you're not. This is my land. I own it. You don't have the right to be here. I haven't sold you anything, the right to be here. So you can't build your line. And Enbridge would say, look at your title. Look at, and they mean is look at your property's title. Look at the title history of your property. Or they just bring it with them. Eventually, it's revealed that back in the 1940s, the Sinclair Oil Company went out and bought for de minimis amounts of money a bunch of easements in central Illinois central and southern Illinois for a pipeline back in the 40s. The problem is that when they went out and did this back in the 40s, the easements themselves that all the landowners sold or that signed were unlikely reviewed by attorneys. You probably just agreed to by farmers that didn't know any better. And they signed these easements. Well, what they ended up signing were blanket easements. And blanket easements are a type of easement that blanket the entirety of the property. Meaning, it's not just the 4 acres that they're taking. The easement itself actually applies to the entirety of the parcel. And this is important because in this Southern Access Pipeline example, when those farmers signed blanket easements back in the 40s, not only did they sign blanket easements, but they also signed the right for Sinclair or whoever holds the easement rights, and these easements get bought and sold all the time. Whoever is the holder of this easement rights can add another pipeline, another pipeline, another pipeline, as many pipelines as they would like, wherever they want on the land. And because they already had the right, and it was already something that they possessed and had possessed since they took ownership of the easement, they didn't need to pay the landowners anything because the landowners had already given up those rights back in the 60s. And those rights, they didn't have the rights to relinquish again because they already gave them away. And so, as an example, you have these really old documents, poorly drafted, incredibly unfavorable to the landowner, that gave carte blanche to the utility companies to do whatever they want on the parcels because they have blanket easements. And yes, these were a long time ago, but I'm still seeing the same thing today. Blanket easements are very common amongst utility companies. They like to seize on landowners not knowing what they're reading, not knowing what they're signing, relying on promises, verbal promises made by utility companies, trusting that what they're saying is true, signing documents that give away, all the rights in the land. So this is all to say that no matter what you do in your case against Ameren, at the very least, I would strongly advise that you have your easement reviewed by an attorney who knows what they're looking for. If you don't care about the money, that's fine. You don't need to, but you should care about the easement because that's something that's not necessarily going to affect you, but it could affect quite a few other people too down the road, your kids or whoever gets the property. Okay, so moving on past easements, I want to talk about money. So there's really going to be two different components of your case with Ameren. It's going to be, what's the easement say? What does the land conveyance document say? And how much money are you getting for the property? And this is what I would include a comprehensive, complete compensation package. And this isn't, every land's different. People might have some issues that they'd like to, the timber damages, for example, are not included in this, but they would also be part of a comprehensive compensation package, making sure you get paid for your trees and your crops and everything. But I'd say roughly, this is what you should be looking for each one. You need a proper price per acre. You should be getting crop damages for up to 5 years, potentially more, or a clause that demands Ameren's payment of these crop damages as they arise. I would assume that Ameren will offer some money up front for these crop damages, but I've yet to see them, and I think there's a decent chance they're going to be insufficient. You should include a payment for anticipated soil and ground damages, or a clause in the easement that mandates that that the Ameren restores it. I see someone raises their hand. We'll get to that later. I don't want to just sit tight if you could, and we'll definitely address it. Thank you though. So soil and ground damages, so you either need to get paid for those up front, or you need a clause in the easement that requires them to fix it. Because I have personally experienced this through my clients on a project a couple of years ago called the Spire Pipeline over near St. Louis. Illinois landowners involved there too as well. They built this pipeline in the middle of flooding. This was in 19, so some of the farmers might remember that. A lot of flooding. They built it right in the middle of it, and it totally messed up these fields. Soil was washed away. Subsoil was mixed with topsoil. Field tile was destroyed. The soil was compacted. There was debris everywhere. There was flooding. They would push water out of the easement onto adjacent land so they could construct their property and destroy adjacent land off easement. This is something you need to have to make sure that they are bound to fix whatever they damage or pay you for those damages. And the final thing that I would say is you probably should include some residual damages in your compensation package. Residual damage is damage outside the easement to the value of the land. So we'll talk about it in the next slide. But depending on your acquisition, you probably should include that as well. A good, I guess, a surrogate term for residual damages would be stigma damage associated with the stigma of power lines, of transmission lines, the stigma associated with having them. So here's a very good example of what residual damage is. You have two different parcels. They are all but identical, both 100 acres right next to each other, same soil, same productivity. Everything about them is identical, but one has a power line, a transmission line, one doesn't. What's the difference between the value of the two parcels? Now, depending on who you ask, it could be significant, could be nothing, but it is definitely arguable that it exists, that this stigma is associated with transmission lines. People don't want to live near transmission lines. People don't want to farm near transmission lines. They don't want to interrupt their farming practices by having to go around monopoles, by maybe avoiding certain areas of the farm. You know, these all are baked into the concept of not wanting transmission lines and not wanting to deal with them. And that difference in value that I've displayed on the slide, that difference between $13,000 an acre and $11,000 an acre is $2,000 an acre on a 100-acre farm. It's not nothing, $200,000. This is also exemplary of how you should want the negotiation to go. And we'll talk about that here in a bit. But you know, you can see that these numbers escalate quite a bit when you're talking about residue damage. And unlike, you know, price per acre, for example, which is only going to go up, you know, marginally depending on what it is, a argument for residual damage increases your recovery significantly, and you know, it puts you in a much better spot and compensates you for any potential value your property may lose. And you know, this is an example of a conversation that, you know, Ameren wants you to have. The right-of-way agent comes to you and says your land's worth $10,000 an acre. These numbers are a little dated. Sorry about that. And your response is generally what happens in these scenarios is farmers, landowners will respond because they'll want to negotiate and they'll say, no, it's worth 11. And the right-of-way agent says, okay, fine, we'll give you 10.5. Good job. You negotiated $500 up on a 4-acre acquisition. It's $2,000. It's not nothing. I don't want to diminish that amount of money, but the reality is that Ameren would love to quibble over $2,000. If every single landowner on this line went to Ameren and just asked for $2,000 more above their offer, they'd be ecstatic. They'd be spending, you know, half of what they expected to on land acquisition. And that's why they love having these discussions about price per acre, because even a decent increase on price per acre only gets you so much on such on a smaller acquisition. This is an example of how the discussion should go. Let's discuss price per acre. Right-of-way agent says. Your response is no. Before we get to that, let's talk about the impact. Let's talk about the diminution in value of my land because of your transmission line. I want 10% of that. For a 100-acre parcel, that's again valued at, these numbers are outdated, but if it's valued at $8,000 an acre, that's an $80,000 difference. They don't want to have $80,000 discussions. They don't want to have $100,000 discussions. They want to have $2,000, $4,000. They want to talk. They want to quibble over crop damages. They want to quibble over price per acre. Maybe quibble over the bonus payment if they offer you a bonus payment. Because this doesn't really move the needle for them. It doesn't. It's not that much money in the large scale thing for you as well. So it's important that when you're having these discussions, which I generally don't advise doing without an attorney or at all, if you are represented by an attorney, you know, they do a lot of things in these discussions, in these negotiations. We'll talk about what that is in the next slide, but it's just important to remember to keep your priorities, keep your focus on what's important. Easement language, residual damage, you know, restoring the soil, restoring the ground, any other types of critical aspects to your property that you need to get covered. Those are discussions that need to be had, and Ameren doesn't want to have. So you have to make them. So I talked about land agents, and you know, we've done this a lot. I've seen a lot of tricks, as I call them, negotiating tactics is another term of right-of-way agents, land agents. And land agents, these folks are going to be hired, they work for right-of-way companies, whether it's contract land staff or they're in-house at Ameren. These are companies, these are people that are dedicated to acquiring land. That's their job. Their job, as they work for this company that works for Ameren, is to get the land as quickly and as cheaply as possible with the most favorable easement language they can get. The right-of-way agents do not work for you. They work for Ameren, or they work for a company that works for Ameren. So whenever they come out and they say things and don't write them down, or they make promises but they don't write them down, or they say, well, we might be able to get you this, but they don't write it down, and they keep everything verbal, and they don't talk about residual damage, and they say, oh, they're only going to do this, they're not going to do this, that's not a real thing. They'll do all sort. They'll tell you anything they need to tell you to get you to sign this paperwork. So just when you're talking with them, if you talk with them, I should state that I don't recommend dealing with right-of-way agents directly as a landowner. I don't think it. I think you're in a lot of respect, you're spinning your wheels. I feel like you're better served talking to the right-of-way agent's boss or somebody who actually works at Ameren. The problem is that it's difficult for a unrepresented landowner to talk directly with Ameren. They'll send you right back to the right-of-way agent. They'll say, no, talk to your right-of-way agent, talk to your right-of-way agent. That is not as difficult for somebody like me, because Ameren knows who I am. We've worked against them before. They know what we're doing. And it's a lot easier for me to shoot an email to Ameren or their counsel and get a dialogue going with people who can make decisions that we want them to make. And that, again, that's just how these things work. Landowners, unfortunately, are usually just dealing with the right-of-way people who are conducting these tricks, these tactics. And these are some that we have seen in these negotiations. They will offer 125%. They'll make it seem like they're giving you a deal, right? They'll say, we're giving you 150% of fair market value. Well, if fair market value is already low to begin with, 150% doesn't really mean much. But beyond that, again, this is right back to the discussion we had last time. You're talking about price per acre. You're not talking about residue damage. Ameren wins. Bonus payments. Again, they'll make it seem like they're doing you a favor. They'll offer you some paltry bonus payment, say, potentially. We haven't seen the offers yet on this project. We just started. I would guess, I presume there's probably some bonus payment involved, which usually is an impetus to get people to sign up sooner rather than later. And that's another thing to keep in mind, is that the quicker you make a decision, the more likely Ameren's going to be happy with it. Because quick decisions, quick paperwork, just a quick sign, we're done. There's a decent chance that you're getting screwed, or you're getting some bad paperwork that's part of that deal. They want these quick. They're going to bug you. They're going to pester you constantly just to get your signature. And if they can do it enough, and they can bug you and make it such a hassle that you don't want to deal with it, or you're just going to take them at their word or whatever, that puts you in a bad spot. They know that. They want to put you in a bad spot so that you sign the paperwork and they get what they want. And so they'll make bonus payments, and they'll say, look, we're doing you a favor, but it's really just a way to speed up the process so that you don't look at the larger picture. A shell game, and this is kind of the street performers, where they say they have the ball under one shell, and then they have the empty shells, and they move them around. They ask you which ball's under. Well, the same concept applies with these right-of-way agents, because they'll want you looking at the shell with this ball under it, and this shell is price per acre. And they'll look at your price per acre and crop damage. They'll say, pay attention to this, and they'll leave this shell over here that's ground restoration, easement language, residual damage, all the things that you're not paying attention to, because you're focusing on the bonus payments, price per acre, all the favors they're doing for you. They're playing this shell game to keep your eye off the prize. So it's important to remember that. Also, of course, I can't remember, you have leverage as a landowner. Ameren wants this land. Your ability to say no comes with some amount of leverage. Now, it isn't going to get you everything you want. And if you're as unrepresented, it isn't quite as much leverage as you'd like. But you do have some leverage at this point of the process. Now, that leverage might diminish or it might go away if you're not represented. But you do have some leverage in your ability to say no. So keep that in mind. Saying no or saying I'll think about it will instantly leverage your position against Ameren when they give you the offer. And they say, well, give us a counter. And you say, no, we'll get back to you next week. Boom, you got leverage. Because now they know they're not going to be able to just come and take advantage of you. And you just on its own, your ability to say no and say, well, we'll get back in touch with you. We'll let you know. That in and of itself is leverage. I've seen, again, more tricks. I've seen verbal offers. If the offer is not in paper, it doesn't matter. It doesn't count. It doesn't mean anything. Verbal promises mean nothing in this scenario. If they're not going to put it pen to paper, they're wasting your time. Just remember that. I've seen lowering offers, raising offers. They say if you don't take this, we're going to go down. If you do take this, we're going to go up. These are all, again, pressuring you to make decisions. And at the end of the day, if you aren't sure if it's a good deal or not, you're not sure whether it's whether you're getting what you should. There's a simple test, and that's giving me a call, shooting me an email, sending me your offer, me looking at it for free, which I will do. I'll review it and I'll tell you, and we'll talk about how our firm works in a bit. But if you call me up and you say I got an offer and you send it to me and I'll look at it, I'm not going to charge you. I'll do it for free, and I'll call you back probably the same day or the next day and say, this is a good deal because XYZ. This is a bad deal because XYZ. And I'm going to tell you if it's a good deal or not, because I'll definitely tell you if it's a bad deal. Because if it's a bad deal, we're probably going to want you as a client so we can get you a much more. If it's a good deal, I'm not going to take you as a client, because if it's a good deal and there's no more money out there that I see, or if it gets you everything you need and there's nothing that I can add to the case, then I'm going to tell you that, because otherwise I'd tell you it's bad and we'd like to represent you. So just keep that in mind. If you aren't sure, just give me a call, shoot me an email. We'll look at it. You won't get a bill. We don't charge. It's not how we work. We'll get into that a bit, but yeah, just don't hesitate to let me know. Okay, we're almost to the end, folks, and then we'll get to these questions. This is hiring an attorney. I can't speak for other attorneys in Illinois. This is our traditional method of representation with landowners. We operate on a contingency fee. A very easy example is this. If you have a $10,000 offer and you hire our firm, we get you $50,000. In this scenario, we get a third of the difference. You get the rest. This allows landowners to hire us without paying us anything, coming out of pocket. What I tell people is in this type of relationship, there's only one check that's written, and it's from our firm to you at the end of the case, whenever that might be. And I should state that our representation there is no time limit on it. You hire us tomorrow, we take it to the end. Now, when is the end? Well, depends on are you settling it now? Are you settling it next year? Are you selling it at eminent domain? Are you in a scenario where they're going to file litigation, condemnation, and an eminent domain lawsuit against you? We'll still be there at that point too. Our representation starts when you sign the contract and it ends when the case is over. It's simple as that. So this is how we work. If you are interested in another type of arrangement, that's fine. We can talk about it. We do some hourly every now and then. We can absolutely discuss this. And I should state that this representation includes easement review. So our job for our clients is twofold. It is making sure the easement is drafted appropriately, drafted in your favor, limits Ameren as much as possible to your benefit. And that's the first aspect of our representation. And the second aspect is the money and making sure the money's right. So we get paid out of the money, but we do services for both. So you get easement plus money for a contingency fee agreement. I want to give an example of let's utilize these numbers again. Let's say you're offered $10,000, and for whatever reason, who knows why, it turns out at the end you only got $10,000. So you're back where you started. What does that mean in that scenario? Do you still owe me money? The answer is no. Okay, we only get paid. We only get paid if we get you more money than what you're offered. If we don't get paid. There isn't a scenario where we get a portion of the 10 when you get your offer from Ameren, I tell folks, consider that your money. And we'll take care of the excess. We'll see what we can get over and above, but consider the offer yours, and we'll focus on getting over and above. Okay, I'm almost to the end, folks, and we'll get to these questions. Moving forward, what I tell people is, as soon as you receive an offer, you have a case, as it were. You have something that can be evaluated. You know where Ameren's going to put the line. You have an offer based on that acquisition. You have an easement. You have a case that can be evaluated and could be a client of ours, as an example. But I tell people, as soon as you get the offer, I tell people it's real. It's going to happen. You should assume it's going to happen, and you should start focusing on this maybe a little bit more than you were previously, or alternatively, have an attorney focus on it, have them deal with it. Until you get that offer, you should be doing basically understanding your priorities, developing a strategy, maybe vetting attorneys, reaching out to folks that might be able to help you out. So maybe vetting them, interviewing them, getting a concept of what you will do when you get that offer. I looked at some of the information of the folks that signed up today. It looks like a lot of people today don't have offers, which is to be expected. We were very early in this project. So just you're doing your job right now, just by not having an offer, being part of this webinar, learning about how this works and what to look for. You're doing what you should be doing. Eventually, you should identify your priorities, your goals, talk to an attorney, and then hire somebody to see and have them see this through to the end. That would be my advice generally. And I'll end on this. This is just some of our experience. Because I can say a lot of things, but these are actual projects that I handled, or that our firm handled in Illinois involving utility companies. This was the Illinois Rivers Project, originally the Three Rivers Project. That was 7 years ago, I believe, 8, somewhere. It's been a while. But we represented, I think, about 60 folks on that. That was my case. That was my project. I represented all the folks, and we got them all more money, I should state. We got them all much better easement. So in that, we've gone up. This is where we got a lot of our Ameren experience specifically, and we were very successful on that. Aspire STL Pipeline, another example where we represented dozens of landowners in Missouri and Illinois as a pipeline. So it was a little different than a power line, of course, but same general concept, a lot of the same rules and requirements. And again, everybody got more money on that. So everybody was getting more twice. I think in some instances, 3 times as much. So it wasn't. We were definitely able to increase numbers on that as well. And I should say broadly, what I tell folks, and this is generally speaking, that generally we're likely to get you more money, and it's not necessarily a question of if, it's more of a question of how much. And that's not a guarantee. That is, I think, a description of our historical work on these types of projects, these types of cases specifically. It's just how it turns out. When the reality of the scenario is that when attorneys get involved, it makes it more expensive for not for you. It makes it more expensive for them. And whether they believe what I'm saying or not, the reality is that my sheer involvement makes it more expensive, or makes it more potentially expensive for them, because then they have to pay their attorneys, and they realize that, and it gets baked into their calculus and their negotiations when they're working against me. So anyway, back to the experience, and then finally, presently, we are working on the Grain Belt Clean Line against Grain Belt, of course. Represent dozens of landowners in Illinois presently. That's a line that actually stretches out to Kansas. And yeah, so that's another example of a transmission line in Illinois presently that we are currently working on. And this is all to say that we have a lot of experience. I'll just leave it at that. Okay, final point, and then I'll take questions. Strength in numbers. I would say that we talked about leverage earlier, and you have some leverage as an individual landowner, but that leverage grows if you are part of a group. And because it's kind of an exponential increase, each new member adds a more leverage for the group, which generally gives better results for the individuals. So our anticipation on this project, just like on the other projects, is that we get quite a few landowners that we represent, each with individual cases, needs, desires, demands, etc. So still with the individual case, but but with quite a few landowners represented. And an easy example of why this works is that if I go to Ameren and say, "Hey, I got 5 landowners in Christian County, and that's it," yeah, they're gonna pay me attention. They'll give us some money, and they'll listen to what I have to say because they know what we do and what we're about. But if I go to Ameren and say, "Hey, listen, I got 60 folks again. We got another Illinois Rivers project. We got another group where we got dozens of landowners." Ameren's got to listen, and they got to listen to carefully to what I have to say, because one individual representing a lot of folks can potentially cause a lot of issues to Ameren. They want to avoid that, and the reality is, again, that the more leverage that exists represented by one attorney, as an example, everybody realizes the benefit of that. And it's not a class action. I don't want to make it seem like it's a group claim or it's a class action where we're making one big claim. It's more, I represent a bunch of folks. Everybody has individual needs and concerns, but you're going to need to treat us fairly, because otherwise we can cause a lot of problems and we can gum this thing up if we chose to. And that's, of course, the goal is individually to get you what you want. But this calculus, they make these determinations depending on who's on the other side of them. So, sorry, it's a little jumbled, but the long and short of it is that the more folks you have as part of a group, the more leverage you have, and the better possible outcome you're looking at. So, you'll be part of group if you work with our firm. You'll be part of a group just because you'll be part of the folks that we represent. But if you have neighbors, if you have folks around that are all kind of in the same scenario, I would advise generally to maybe lock arms with your neighbor, maybe get a little, maybe correspond with your neighbor, kind of get in touch, and maybe go with one attorney to increase both of your chances at a better recovery. So that's, it's not required, it's not necessary, but it is something that I like to get out there, because it can't be said enough how much groups are great from a leverage perspective. Okay, so I will take questions, and I'll answer the ones that we currently have. Before I do that, please, if you have offers, again, for free review, please just go ahead and send your offers to jordan@landownerattorneys.com. You can text it to this number as well, 470-869-1383. That's my cell. It goes to my cell. So you don't need to. If you just want to send me an offer, I'll know what to do with it. I might ask for some more documents, but you can just send it, or you can contact me and we can go from there. But in any event, I'm happy to look at that if you have it. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and look at these questions. Okay, there was a question. There are two. Okay, the first question is, will this presentation be archived for later viewing? Yes, it will. It should send you a recording to the email subsequent. If it doesn't, I'm going to follow up either this afternoon or tomorrow and send out a recording that anyone can view with the link. So you will get a webinar recording of this. The second question, are you also working with landowners in Iowa affected by the CO2 pipeline project? My answer is, which one? There are multiple in Iowa. And the answer is yes, we are. We are working with landowners against the CO2 pipelines that are coming through Iowa and Illinois. There are multiple. If that is affecting your land, please feel free to contact me separately and we can talk about that. It's obviously different from this, but it's definitely something we do. How do I print the slides? Well, I can email you the slides if you'd like. If you want to send me an email and I can get those out to you. Just if you want a copy of these slides, just send me an email and I'll send it to you. But like I said, you are going to get a webinar, or you're going to get a recording as well. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, and then how do you figure your fee if hired before formal offer received? So that is a great question. First of all, how do you hire our firm if you don't have an offer? And how does the fee structure work? And that is something that we definitely do. It's a little less common, but we certainly will work with folks. And what we do in that scenario is we'll sign a contract that is like any other contract we sign. We'll leave in our contract, there's a blank for where the offer goes from Ameren. What we'll do is we'll leave that blank. And then when you do receive the offer from Ameren, we'll just go back in and input it into the blank. And we'll just go from there. So if that's something you're interested in, we can absolutely talk about that. But that's how it would work. Susan, I see you have a raise your hand. Would you mind putting your question in the Q&A or in the chat? That way we can answer it. Yeah, if you could, so if you do have a question, please put it in the Q&A, just write it and put it in there. And then I'll answer it once we get it. So there are no other questions right now, but I'm going to give it a little bit of time to see if anyone has any other ones. And we will answer them as they come in. If there are no questions, if you don't have any questions and you've heard what you need to hear, that's not a problem, not a problem, Susan. So Susan didn't have a question. Okay. I don't see any other. Oh, what about right of entry notices? Great question. Okay. So Ameren needs to survey a lot of the land ahead of these acquisitions. They do not have the legal right to enter property to survey right now. They get that legal right just like IDOT has it, as an example, inherently. Ameren will get that right when they get their certificate of convenience and necessity. So they're gonna so they filed their petition in February. They're probably going to get that certificate at the end of this year, maybe early next year. With that certificate, they will also ask for eminent domain. And at the same time, once they get that certificate, they will have the ability to survey your property, whether you like it or not. So I guess it ultimately comes, what I tell people is that, they don't have the right to be there right now. That's why they're seeking these right of entry, or it should be an agreement that they're seeking from you to allow them to entry. But people ask, should I let them survey? I say, they're gonna likely be able to do it anyway eventually. So the question is whether or not you want to do it now in your presence, maybe monitoring them, making sure they don't destroy anything. If they come in, if they come in at a later time without permission, and maybe knock down some stuff and you don't see it till later, you don't want to deal with something like that. But so you might you could agree to go out with them when they want to do it so that you're sitting there and do it, or you just ignore it and say no, and then they'll just come in eventually and do it, maybe a little less diplomatically. So something to consider. You don't need to let them survey. It's really up to you whether or not you'd like to let them do it and then be there, as opposed to them doing it down the road and you not being there. Do you have a counter to the original right of entry notice, which say cutting down vegetation? They don't have the right to cut down your vegetation. And if they do, that's a trespass. So they might seek your ability to cut down vegetation, which you would, theoretically grant in that right of entry notice. But no, they don't have allowed. If they want to cut down your crops and you want to let them do it, then they got to pay for it. Simple as that. It's yeah. If they're asking for the ability to chop down crops, cut down crops right now, I mean, it better be, for you, there's got to be a monetary component if you're going to let them in and say, okay, fine, you want to come in, then it's going to cost you, if you even let them to begin with. So, that would be my counter to that. Okay. Another question: do you deal with trying to get Ameren to move the easement? It's currently 200 feet off a county road instead of along the road, which means problem farming. Excellent question. We absolutely, if one of the things you would like is that they move the line or do a different alignment, we can absolutely do that on your behalf. It's something, it's as your attorney, we'll do what you would like us to do. What I will say is that moving power lines. In that scenario, the 200-foot off the county line road scenario where they're leaving, basically, it sounds like a strip of land between the easement and the road, that's unfarmable, unreachable. I would agree. That's a scenario where, the first thing you'd say was, okay, put this thing along the road, please, as opposed to in the middle of my field. What I'll say is that unlike, money, for example, there's no legal apparatus to make Ameren move their line. Meaning, if this case got all the way down to eminent domain, let's say, they couldn't reach a deal, they got their certificate, and they're filing suit against you down the road to acquire the land, and you're saying, please, you're saying at that point, move the line, and they say no, you can't go to the court and say, tell them to move it over here. The court won't do that. If Ameren, and the reason is that Ameren is kind of the arbiter in this scenario of where they want this thing to go. And if they say this is where they want it and the engineering says this is where they should put it, a court is just going to say, well, that's where they want it and this is what they want to do. But if you have enough leverage in your negotiations, if you're represented by counsel, if you maybe have a group of folks, if you're, this and that, if you're being taken seriously by Ameren, I should say, then a lot of times, that increases your potential leverage to get that thing moved to the road. It's certainly something that we do. There's no guarantee that they will move it. And again, there's nothing to physically make them move it, but for your negotiations with them. So it's something that we will definitely, we've done it before. We don't guarantee anything on that just because, well, we can't guarantee anything, but it's a little more difficult to do that only because Ameren knows that ultimately they're going to be able to put it where they want. And so, unless you can make it worth their while to move it up along the road and maybe cause less issues for them, then yeah, you could, they're probably going to put it where they want, but you could be successful in moving it. It's certainly something we can do. Sorry, that was a lot of words. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, I am not seeing any other questions. Okay. Well, then if that is the case and there are no other questions, that's fine. If you think of something later, please shoot me an email, text me, whatever you'd like. I'm happy to answer questions separately. Other than that, thank you everyone for your attendance. I appreciate it. We'll be sending this webinar out here once we're done. If you have questions, give me a call. Otherwise, good luck, and hopefully hopefully we'll be working with some of you. Thanks.